Welcome to Two Boys in a Book. These are nighttime readings from a mom and her two boys. Let's go on an adventure through reading. Chapter 14, The Black Stream. That part of the Earth's surface occupied by water is evaluated more than 147,959,620 square miles, or over 94 billion acres. This liquid mass has a volume of 2,250 million cubic miles and would form a sphere with a diameter of over 2,000 miles, which would weigh 3 quadrillion tons. And in order to understand this number, one must realize that a quintillion is to a billion what a billion is to one, or in other words, that there are as many billions in a quintillion than there are units in a billion, and this mass of liquid is more or less equal to the quantity of water that all the rivers of the earth would pour forth in 40 million years. In early geological times, a period of fire was followed by a period of water. At first, the ocean covered everything. Then, little by little, during the Silurian period, mountaintops appeared, forming islands, disappeared beneath the floods, and then rose again, joined together to form continents, and finally the land became fixed as we now know it. The solid element had 37,657,000 square miles from the liquid element, or slightly over 24 billion acres. The shape of the continents make it possible to divide these waters into 5 great areas: the Arctic, Antarctic, Indian, Atlantic, and Pacific Oceans. The Pacific Ocean extends from north to south between the two polar circles and from west to east between Asia and America through 145 degrees of longitude. It is the calmest of all the oceans. Its currents are wide and slow, its tides moderate, and its rainfall abundant. Such was the ocean I was destined to first see under the strangest conditions. "Professor," said Captain Nemo, "if you would like to accompany me, I am going to take our bearings and determine our point of departure for the voyage. It's 11:45, and I am going to surface." The captain pressed a button 3 times. The pumps began to expel water from the reservoirs. The pressure gauge showed that the Nautilus was rising, and then it stopped. "We're there," said Captain. I walked to the companionway leading to the platform. I climbed the iron steps, passed through an open hatch, and arrived on the top side of the Nautilus. The platform was only 2.5 feet above water level. The bow and stern of the Nautilus had the spindle shape, which gave it to the form of a long cigar. I noticed that its steel plates overlapped somewhat, making them look like the scales of large land reptiles. I could therefore easily understand how, even with the finest binoculars, the vessel had always been taken for a marine animal. Toward the middle of the platform, the dinghy that half buried the whole of the ship protruded slightly. Fore and aft, there was 2 small compartments with inclined sides and containing windows of thick, lens-like glass. One contained the helmsman, who steered the Nautilus, and the other held the powerful electric light, which guided him on his route. The sea was splendid, the sky serene. The long ship scarcely felt the broad ocean swell. A light easterly breeze rippled the surface of the water. The horizon was free from any trace of mist and could be clearly seen for purposes of observation. Nothing was in sight. No reef, no island, no Abraham Lincoln, a vast desert. Captain Nemo measured the height of the sun with his sextant, then getting his latitude, he waited for several minutes until, through the eyepiece, he could see the sun touching the horizon. During this operation, not one of his muscles moved, and the instruments would not have been more immobile in a marble hand. "It's noon, Professor," he said. "Whenever you want." I took one last look at the sea, slightly yellow as it always is near the coast of Japan, and I went back down to the lounge. There the captain determined his bearings and chronometrically calculated his longitude. He then said, "Monsieur Aronnax, we're at 137 degrees 15 feet west." "Of what, meridian?" I asked anxiously, hoping his answer would indicate his nationality. "Monsieur," he replied, "I have chronometers set according to the meridians of Paris, Greenwich, and Washington, but in your honor I shall use the one set according to Paris." This answer told me nothing. I bowed, and the commander went on. 137 degrees, 15 feet west of the Paris meridian, and 30 degrees, 7 foot north latitude, or in other words, about 300 miles from the coast of Japan. And today, the 8th of November, at noon, begins our voyage of underwater explorations. May God be with us, I replied. And now, Professor, the captain added, I leave you to your studies. I've given orders for our course to be set for east-northeast and at the depth of 165 feet. Here are some large-scale charts on which you may follow our journey. This room is at your disposal, and now, with your permissions, I shall retire. Captain Nemo bowed. I remained alone, lost in thoughts about the commander of the Nautilus. Would I ever find out what country this strange man belonged? He who boasted that he belonged to none, which had brought on this hatred he felt for the human race, a hatred which was perhaps seeking some terrible revenge. Was he one of those unrecognized scientists, one of those geniuses whom the world had humiliated, as Conseil put it? A modern Galileo, or one of those scientists like the American Maori, whose career had been shattered by political revolutions? I could not yet say. As for me, whom fate had thrown aboard the ship and whose life Captain Nemo held in his hand, he had received me coldly but nonetheless hospitably. Except for one detail. He had never shaken my hand when I stretched it out to him, nor had he stretched his out to me. For a whole hour I remained lost in these thoughts, trying to penetrate this mystery which was so fascinated me. Then my glance fell on the vast map of the world laid out on the table, and I placed a finger on our present position. The sea, like land, also has rivers. They are special currents that can be easily recognized by their temperature and color, and the most remarkable of these is the Gulf Stream. Science has been able to determine the place of 5 such currents, one in the North Atlantic, a second in the South Atlantic, a third in the North Pacific, a fourth in the South Pacific, and a fifth in the Southern Indian Ocean. It seems likely that once upon a time, a sixth existed in the Northern Indian Ocean when the Caspian and Aral seas were united to the great Asian lakes and formed a single expanse of water. Now, the point on the map indicated by my finger was in one of these great currents, the Black Stream, or as the Japanese call it, the Kuroshio. It starts in the Bay of Bengal, where it is heated by the tropical sun, crosses the Straits of Malacca, flows along the coast of Asia, curves around the North Pacific to the Aleutian Islands, carrying along with it the trunks of camphor trees and other objects it had picked up on its way, cutting a clear path through the ocean with deep blue of its warm waters. It was this current the Nautilus was going to cross. I looked at it on the map. I could see it lose itself in the vast expanse of the Pacific, and I felt as if I were being carried off with it when Ned Land and Conseil appeared at the door of the lounge. My two friends were thunderstruck by all the marvels spread before their eyes. "Where are we? Where are we?" cried the Canadian. "In the Quebec Museum?" "With Monsieur's permission," Conseil interjected. "It seems more like the Summerand Palace." "My friends," I answered, motioning for them to enter, "you're neither in Canada nor in France, but on board the Nautilus, 165 feet below the surface of the ocean." "If Monsieur says so, we must believe him," said Conseil, "but this room is enough to astonish even a Belgian like myself." "Don't worry about your astonishment, my friend. Look around. For a good classifier like you, there's enough here to keep you busy for a good while." I didn't have to encourage Conseil. He was already leaning over the cases and mumbling the naturalist language. Class of gastropods, family of buccinoids, genus of cowries, species of Cyproea, Madagascarensis, etc. Meanwhile, Ned Land, who cared little for shells and mollusks, questioned me about my interview with Captain Nemo. Had I found out who he was, where he came from, where he was going, how deep he would take us? In short, 1,000 questions which I didn't have time to answer. I told him all I knew, or rather didn't know, and asked him what he had heard or seen. "I haven't heard or seen a thing,"
answered the Canadian. I haven't even seen any of the crew of the ship. Could that be electrical, too? Electrical? I swear I'm almost ready to believe it. But you, Monsieur Aronnax, asked Ned Land, still clinging to his eyes, can't you tell me how many men there are aboard? 10, 20, 50, 100? I have no way of knowing, Ned, and besides, for the moment anyhow, please give up your ideas of seizing control of the Nautilus or escaping. This boat is a masterpiece of modern industry, and I feel lucky to have seen it. Many people would jump at the chance we've had, if only to stroll in a land of wonder, so be calm and let's try and see what goes on around us. See what goes on around us, cried the harp. We can't and never will see a thing from inside this steel-plated prison. This boat travels and navigates like a blind man. Just as Ned Land uttered these last words, the room was plunged into darkness. Total darkness. The ceiling lights had gone out so quickly that it made my eyes hurt, just as if we'd gone abruptly from utter darkness to brilliant light. We all remained silent, without moving, not knowing what pleasant and unpleasant surprise awaited us. But then there was a noise of something sliding. It seemed as if panels were moving along the sides of the Nautilus. This is the end, said Ned Land. Order of Hajamuduse, murmured Conseil. Suddenly, light entered from each side of the room. Through two oblong openings, the surrounding water appeared brilliantly.
Second time now.
Lit up by the electrical light atop the Nautilus, two glass panels separated us from the sea. At first I shuddered at the thought that this fragile partition would break, but it was held in by strong copper frames which gave it an almost limitless resistance. The sea was distinctly visible within a radius of a mile around the Nautilus. What a sight! What pen could describe it? What could paint the effects of light penetrating these transparent layers of water and growing dimmer as it reached into distant corners of the ocean? The clarity of the seawater is well known as clearer than spring water. The mineral and organic substances it holds in suspicion actually increases its transparency. In certain parts of the ocean, in the West Indies, for example, a sandy bottom almost 500 feet down can be seen with surprising clarity, and the sun's rays are apparently able to penetrate to the depths of 1,000 feet. But the Nautilus could produce its own light in the ocean depths. It was no longer illuminated water, but liquid light. If anyone admits Ehrenberg's theory that the great ocean depths are illuminated by phosphorescence, then nature has reserved one of her most extraordinary spectacles for its inhabitants, as I could see by the 1,000 different ways the light played about before my eyes. On each side of the room I had a window open to unexplored depths. The darkness within the room made it easier to see out, and we looked through this clear glass as if there was a window of an immense aquarium. The Nautilus did not seem to be moving, but this was an illusion due to the fact that there was no points of reference. Occasionally, however, lines of water divided by the spurt on the submarine's prow would stream by us at great speed. We stood leaning against the windows in a state of stupefaction, and no one broke the silence until Conseil finally said, "You wanted to see something, Ned, and now you've got it." "Unbelievable," mumbled the Canadian, who had forgotten his rage and his plans for escape, and now felt irresistibly attracted to the spectacle before him. "It's worth coming a long way to see something like this." "Ah," I said to myself, "now I understand the life Captain Nemo leads. He's created a private world for himself full of the most astounding marvels." "But where are the fish?" observed the Canadian. "I don't see any fish." "What difference does it make, Ned?" replied Conseil, "since you couldn't tell them apart anyway." "Me? A fisherman?" This started an argument between the two friends, for they were both knowledgeable on the subject of fish, but in different ways. Everyone knows that fish form the fourth and the last class of the subkingdom of vertebrates. They have been very acutely described as vertebrates with their double circulatory system and cold blood, breathing through gills and living in the water. They form two distinct groups, those with true bone structure and those which are cartilaginous, that is to say, whose spinal column is made of cartilage. Cartilaginous. Perhaps the Canadian had a vague idea of his distinction, but Conseil knew it only too well, and now that he had become such good friends with Ned, he felt he had to show off his knowledge. He therefore said, "Ned, you're a killer of fish. A first class..." This is Conseil. "Ned, you're a killer of fish, a first-class fisherman. You've caught a great number of these interesting creatures, but I'll bet you don't know how to classify them." "Yes, I do," answered the harpooner in all seriousness. "They're classified into those you can eat, those you can't." "That's a glutton's way of classifying them," replied Conseil. "But let's see if you know the difference between fish with true bone structure and those which are cartilaginous." "A little bit, Conseil." "And the subdivisions of these two big classes?" "I haven't a clue," answered the Canadian. "Well, Ned, listen and concentrate. Fish with true bone structure are divided into 6 orders. First, the Acanthopterygi, whose upper jaw is complete and mobile and whose gills are shaped like a comb. This order comprises 15 families, that is to say, 3/4 of all known fish. Type, the common perch." "Not bad eating," answered Ned Land. "Second," Conseil continued, "the Abdomales, whose ventral fins are underneath, behind the pectorals, without being attached to the shoulder bone. This order is divided into 5 families and includes most freshwater fish. Type, the carp and the pike." "Phew," said the Canadian with an air of disdain. "Freshwater fish." "Third," said Conseil, "the Sabraki, whose ventral fins are attached beneath the pectoral fins and directly onto the shoulder bone. This order comprises 4 families. Type, plaice, dabs, turbots, brills, sole, etc." "Marvelous," cried the harpooner, who refused to consider fish from any other point of view but that of how good they were to eat. "Fourth," continued Conseil, unconcerned, "the apods, with elongated bodies, lacking ventral fins, and covered with thick and often sticky skin. This order contains only 1 family. Type, eels." "Not so good," replied Ned Land. "Fifth," said Conseil, "the Lophobrachii, whose jaws are complete and free-moving, but whose gills are made of little tufts grouped into pairs along their brachial arches. This order comprises only 1 family. Type, seahorses and pipefishes." "Terrible, terrible," said the harpooner. "Sixth," said Conseil, "the Plectognathi, whose maxillary bone is attached to the side of their intermaxillary, which forms the jaw, and whose posttemporal bone is united with the skull, thus making it immobile. The fish of this order lack true ventral fins, and they comprise 2 families. Types, the globefish and the sunfish." "They're enough to dishonor the pot they're cooked in," cried the Canadian. "Did you understand all that, Ned?" Conseil asked. "Not in the least, my friend," replied the harpooner, "but go on anyhow, it's very interesting." "As for cartilaginous fish," continued the imperturbable Conseil, "they only comprise 3 orders." "The fewer the better," said Ned. "First, the cyclostomi, whose jaws were welded into a kind of mobile ring whose gills consist of a large number of holes. This order comprises only 1 family. Type, the lamprey." "You can't help but like them," said Ned Land. "Second, the Salachi, whose gills are like those of the cyclostomi, but whose lower jaw is mobile. This order, the most important of the class, comprises 2 families, rays and sharks." "What?" cried Ned. "Rays and sharks in the same order? Let me tell you, my friend, that in the interest of the ray fish, it would be best not to put them together in a tank." "Third," continued Conseil, "the Sterones, whose gills usually consist of only 1 slit with a gill cover. This order includes 4 genera. Type, the sturgeon." "Ah, Conseil, you've kept the best for last, or at least in my opinion. Is that all?" Yes, Ned, said Conseil, but even when you know that much, you still have known nothing, for these families are divided into genera, subgenera, species, varieties. Well then, Conseil, said the harpooner, leaning against one of the windows, here you are. Here are your varieties passing by now. Look! Fish! Cried Conseil. It's as if we were in front of an aquarium. No, I answered, for an aquarium is a cage, and these fish are here as free as the birds in the air. Come on, Conseil, tell us their names, said Ned Land. I can't, answered Conseil. That's my master's job. And to tell the truth, although this fine young man was an enthusiastic classifier, he was not a naturalist, and I don't know if he could have distinguished a tuna from a bonito. In a word, he was the opposite of Ned Land, who could name all these fish without a moment's hesitation. A triggerfish, I said. A Chinese triggerfish, answered Ned Land. Genus of Balastes, family of Sclerodermi, order of Plectognathi, murmured Conseil. There was no doubt about it. Between the two of them, Ned Land and Conseil would have made a distinguished naturalist. The Canadian had made no mistake. A school of triggerfish, with their flat bodies and grainy skin, and with the spike on their top fin, were playing around the Nautilus, waving the 4 rows of spines on each side of their tails. The coloring was marvelous, gray underneath and white on top, with gold spots which glistened in the somber swirling water. Some rays were undulating around them like a piece of cloth flapping in the wind, and among them I noticed to my great joy a Chinese ray, yellowing on top and delicate pink underneath, and armed with 3 spikes behind his eye. A rare species, and one that was even doubtful in Lacapede's day, for he never had seen one except in a collection of Japanese drawings. For 2 hours, a whole aquatic army escorted the Nautilus. Among these fish, as they played and leaped, rivaling each other in beauty, brilliance, and speed, I could make out a green wrasse, a red mullet with a double black stripe, a type of goby with a rounded caudal fin, white in color with violet spots on his back, a Japanese scomber, a beautiful mackerel of the type that would inhabit these waters, with a blue body and silver head, some blue-gold azurers, whose name alone is better than any description, some striped gilt heads with blue and yellow fins, another type of gilt head with a black band across its caudal fin, yet another type with an elegant corset of 6 stripes, some alastoma, well described by their popular name of flute-mouth or snipefish, some specimens which grow to be a yard long, some giant salamanders, and spiny morays, 6 feet long serpents with small, lively eyes with a huge mouth bristling with teeth, etc. Our admiration didn't diminish for a moment. We kept up an incessant commentary. Ned would name the fish, Conseil would classify them, and I would go in ecstasies over their movements and their beauties of their forms. Never before had I been able to observe these creatures alive and free in their natural element. I won't cite all the varieties of fish which passed before our dazzled eyes, an entire collection of those living in Japanese and Chinese waters. These fish would gather around the ship thicker than birds in the sky, undoubtedly attracted by the gleam of the electric light. But suddenly the lounge itself was bathed in light. The iron panels closed, the enchanting vision disappeared. But I kept on dreaming until my eyes fell on the instruments hanging on the wall. The compass still pointed to the north by northeast. The pressure gauge showed a pressure of 5 atmospheres corresponding to a depth of 160 feet. And the electric log showed us to be traveling at 15 knots. I waited for Captain Nemo, but he did not appear. It was 5 o'clock. Ned Land and Conseil returned to their cabin, and I to mine. My dinner was waiting for me. It consisted of turtle soup made from the most delicate hawkbills, a surmullet whose white flesh had been rolled and folded and whose liver had been prepared as an excellent side dish, and then some fillets of emperor fish, which seemed to be even better than the salmon. I spent the evening reading, writing, and thinking. Then I was overtaken by drowsiness. I stretched out on my eelgrass bed and fell asleep, sound asleep, while the Nautilus glided through the strong current of the Black Stream.
Thank you for watching. Tune in for chapter 15.
All right, see you tomorrow. And make sure to check out their gaming channel, Riker and Boone. Bye.